Last July, my cucumbers looked like they had given up on life. The leaves were the color of old straw, curling inward as if trying to hide from the sun. When I touched them, they crackled like old paper. The stems had gone limp, as if the life had drained out into the hot earth. The tiny fruits, no bigger than my thumb, would yellow and drop before they could swell. My wife, who has a practical heart, said, "Maybe it's the heat. Let some go, and we will plant again in the fall." But I could not let them go. I remembered something my grandfather taught me when I was a boy in the mountains of Japan. A simple kitchen brew that costs almost nothing and wakes up the soil like a gentle rain after a long drought. I mixed it, let it sit overnight, and watered the roots. Within 9 days, those same plants were climbing the trellis with new dark leaves, and the cucumbers came so fast I could not pick them quick enough. The neighbors thought I had bought some expensive secret. I smiled and told them the truth. It was yeast. What if I told you that a single watering with a humble, bubbling mixture from your kitchen could turn your struggling vegetables into a jungle of green, pushing out a harvest so heavy the trellis groans? By the end of this story, I will share 3 simple boosters that many old gardeners in my village use to make it even stronger. But the heart of it is so simple it feels like a secret you should have known all along. No expensive bottles, no mysterious powders from the garden center, just a quiet remembering of what your grandmother might have done without thinking twice. My name is Michael. I came to this country from a very small farming village in Japan many decades ago. I was raised mostly by my grandfather, who had hands like old roots and a walk that never hurried. He smelled of cedar smoke and freshly turned earth, and his voice was soft like the wind through the bamboo. He never bought fertilizer from a store. He said the best things for the soil are already in the home, if you know how to look. In Japanese, we have a word that sits at the center of this way of living, matenai. It means a regret over wasting something that still has life in it. A kind of gentle sigh when you see a useful thing thrown away before its time. A handful of spent yeast, a cold cup of rice water, eggshells that still hold the memory of the hen. That word, motenai, is what my grandfather breathed when he saved these scraps and returned them to the earth. I still see him, at dusk, carrying a wooden bucket of kitchen scraps to the compost pile, murmuring that word like a prayer. I carry that word with me in my own garden here, a small patch in the backyard that my wife and I have tended for over 40 years. It is not a large garden, just a few raised beds and a row of clay pots on the patio. But every leaf holds a memory of his teaching. Before we go on, what I am showing you today is one method. There are more than 390 others. All my life, the old people who raised me lived by one word, matenai, and they had a clever, simple way for nearly everything: the garden, the pests, the pantry, the cleaning, the repairs, the home remedies, staying warm through winter. I gathered them all into one place, the Home Savings Almanac, 12 books anyone can follow. Watching this video will not change your home. Doing these things will. If you are in earnest, you want the whole library. It is discounted now, but the price climbs again soon. The link is below and in the first pinned comment. It costs less than a single dinner out, and it pays for itself by your next bill. Do not wait. You can begin today. Now let us continue. I say this gently, as a guest in your country, but I sometimes feel a quiet sadness when I walk the aisles of the garden stores here. So many plastic bottles, so many promises on the label, when the old knowing is nearly free and already waiting in your kitchen cupboard. Before I go any further, I would love to hear about your garden. Tell me in the comments where you live and what you grow. I read every single one, and it feels like walking through a global garden with friends. Even if you are just starting with a single pot on a balcony, I want to know. Now let me talk about what most folks in this fast world get wrong. They look at a tired plant and they think, I must feed the plant. So they reach for a bottle of brightly colored liquid, a shot of nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium mixed in a factory far away. And it works for a moment. Yes, the plant greens up, pushes out some leaves, and then the soil underneath grows a little more lifeless each season. The old farmers understood something different. They did not feed the plant. They fed the invisible community living in the soil, the billions of tiny creatures and fungi that break down minerals and carry them gently to the roots. My grandfather would scoop a handful of soil, hold it to his nose, and say, If it smells like the forest floor after rain, you are rich. If it smells like dust, you are poor. I have never forgotten that. A living soil is a patient, generous thing. A dead soil needs a constant drip of bottled things to produce anything. What my grandfather taught me, and what I want to share with you today, is a way to wake up that life again without spending a single dollar. Let me walk you through it, step by gentle step. The base mixture has only 3 ingredients you almost certainly have right now: dry active yeast, ordinary granulated sugar, and warm water. That is all. I will not pretend this is a magic spell that works outside the laws of nature. Ask me how I know. I have tested it on cucumbers, on tomatoes, on peppers, on eggplants, and on beans. The difference is not a little. It is a deep, whole plant health that you can see in the thickness of the stems and the dark, glossy color of the leaves. The yeast brew is so simple that the first time I showed my wife, she laughed and said, "That is just bread in a jar." But then she saw the results. First, you take a clean jar or bottle, something around a quart size. Into that, you measure 1 level tablespoon of dry active yeast, the kind you might use for baking bread on a slow Sunday morning. Then you add 1 tablespoon of sugar. The sugar is not for the plant, not directly. It is the breakfast for the yeast. You pour in warm water, not hot, not cold. Warm, like the temperature of a baby's bath. My grandfather would test it with his finger, closing one eye, and if he could not feel a difference from his own skin, it was perfect. You stir it gently until the sugar dissolves and the yeast turns the water a soft tan, like weak tea. Now you leave it alone. You do not seal the cap tight. The yeast will wake up and begin to breathe, and that breath creates a gas that could build pressure. So just rest the cap on top, or cover it with a clean cloth and a rubber band. Let it sit overnight. If you are in a hurry, 2 hours will work, but I always let it sit in a quiet corner of the kitchen until the morning. I place the jar on the kitchen windowsill where the morning sun can warm it just a bit, and I go to sleep knowing something good is working while I rest. When you come back, you will see a fine foam on top, like the head of a good beer on a hot day. If you put your ear close, you can hear a faint hissing, the sound of millions of tiny lives waking up. That foam is the sign that the little workers have come alive and multiplied, filling the water with enzymes and proteins and organic acids. Now, an honest caution: if your yeast does not foam, or if you forget it for more than a day and it starts to smell sour like old vinegar, do not use it. That means the wrong bacteria have taken over. Modernai, yes, but sometimes discarding a spoiled batch is better than harming your soil. Start fresh, and next time, use it within 24 hours. Now you might ask, why does this simple brew help so much? I was curious too, so I read the studies that the university folks later published, and they confirmed what the old farmers knew by watching. Yeast is a fungus, a beneficial one. When it ferments with the sugar, it produces a cocktail of vitamins, particularly B vitamins, and growth-promoting substances that stimulate root development. It also releases enzymes that help unlock phosphorus and potassium and even ammonia compounds that are stuck in the soil, making them available to the roots. There is something else that very few people talk about. The yeast solution helps build a protective film around the root zone, making it harder for pathogenic bacteria and fungi to take hold. Like a mother tucking a blanket around a child's shoulders, the yeast forms a thin, protective barrier that keeps soil-borne illnesses at a distance. My grandfather would say, the yeast is a good neighbor. It crowds out the bad ones and shares its lunch. And when a hot drought comes, the plants treated with this brew seem to hold their strength longer, their stomata closing more efficiently to save water. I have seen it with my own eyes. During a heat wave 2 summers back, my tomatoes that had received the yeast watering every 2 weeks stayed firm and green, while the ones I had neglected began to wilt by 3 in the afternoon. My neighbor, a young man who trusts the internet and the brightly colored bottles, lost half his tomato plants that summer. He asked me why mine stood so firm. I told him it was not magic, just a little yeast and some old patience. He did not believe me at first, but the next year he asked for the recipe. So now you have your quart of fermented yeast water, foamy and smelling faintly like a bakery. What you do next is simple. Fill a 5-gallon bucket almost to the top with water that is at room temperature or slightly warm. The cold water straight from the ground can shock the tender yeast cells, so I often set my bucket in the sun for an hour or two before adding the mixture. Then pour in the entire quart of yeast solution and stir with a stick or your hand. I use a broken paint stick that I keep on a hook by the garden gate. It has stirred many a bucket, and it has never complained. This diluted mixture is your working solution. Use it the same day you mix it, when the life in it is still dancing. Now let me share the 3 boosters that my grandfather sometimes added, and that I have found make a good thing even better. You do not need them. The base yeast alone will give you a garden that makes your neighbors lean over the fence with questions. But if you have them, or if you want to go a little deeper into the old ways, these 3 are worth their weight in harvest. They cost nothing Matanai, you see, because they are things most households throw away. The first booster is wood ash. In my village, we cooked over a wood fire, and the fine gray powder left behind was never wasted. Wood ash is rich in potassium and a whole parade of trace minerals that the tree pulled up from deep in the earth. It also sweetens acidic soil gently. I keep a small tin of it in my tool shed, collected from the fire pit where I burn fallen branches after storms. I remember my grandfather keeping a large clay pot under the eaves, and after every cooking fire, he would carefully scrape the cold ash into it, sifting out the charcoal chunks with a piece of window screen. The ash was so fine it puffed like smoke when you touched it. One important rule: collect the ash before the rain gets to it. Once water soaks through, the minerals leach back into the ground. If you do not have a fire pit, you can sometimes find clean, untreated wood ash at a garden center. For a quart of the concentrated yeast starter, you can add 1 tablespoon of sifted wood ash. Just a spoonful, not more. Too much ash can make the soil too alkaline, and plants like balance, my grandfather would say, only as much as a sparrow takes for its bath. I smile because he never saw a sparrow take a bath in ash, but I understood. The second booster is eggshell powder. All winter, my wife saves eggshells in a bowl on the counter. She rinses them under the tap, peels away the inner membrane so they dry clean, and sets them on a sunny ledge. The sound of the grinder in the morning, a high whine turning to a hum, is a familiar music now. Eggshells are almost pure calcium carbonate, and calcium is essential for preventing blossom end rot in tomatoes and peppers, for building strong cell walls in all vegetables. It also feeds the earthworms. But raw crushed shells can take months to break down. Ground to a powder and mixed into the yeast solution, the fermentation acids help make that calcium available much faster. For the same quart of yeast starter, add 1 level tablespoon of the fine eggshell powder. It will sink to the bottom of the bucket, so stir well as you use it. This is Matanai in action, the shell that once held a new life, now strengthening a new plant. I should offer a quiet word of caution. Do not use shells from eggs that were eaten raw without being cooked first, because of the risk of salmonella. Boil or bake them briefly to be sure, or simply collect shells from cooked eggs. It is just plain sense, like washing your hands after handling soil. The third booster is Epsom salt, which is simply magnesium sulfate. Magnesium sits at the heart of the chlorophyll molecule, the green blood of leaves. Without it, the lower leaves turn yellow between the veins, a quiet cry for help. Epsom salt dissolves cleanly like fine snow and delivers both magnesium and sulfur, which also aids in the formation of plant proteins and oils. For the quart of starter, I use just half a teaspoon. A little goes a long way. In Japan, we have a word, shokunin, meaning the spirit of a craftsman. A shokunin knows that the right tool in the right amount makes the work sing. Too much Epsom salt can lock up other nutrients, so I am careful, like adding salt to a soup. Taste, never overwhelm. You can add any combination of these 3 boosters to the yeast starter before you dilute it into the 5-gallon bucket. Sometimes I add all 3, sometimes just the ash and eggshell, depending on what the soil tells me. The important thing is the foundation, the live yeast and the sugar, fermented with warm water and a little patience. Now, how do you apply this brew? I use it once every 2 weeks during the main growing season. There is a balance to keep. The yeast is not a daily tonic. It is a gentle nudge, a community gathering for the soil. Too much, and the soil can become too rich in a certain kind of bacterial bloom. I take about 1 cup of the diluted solution and pour it slowly around the base of each plant, right where the stem meets the earth. I do not splash the leaves much. though you can also use it as a foliar spray if you strain it first through a cloth to remove any particles that might clog your sprayer. A foliar feeding with this weak solution can give the leaves a quick drink of vitamins and trace minerals, especially during a stressful hot spell. I sometimes use a gallon jug with a tiny pinhole in the bottom as a slow-release waterer. I take an old gallon water jug, the kind you buy from the grocery, and I heat a needle with a match just enough to push it through the side near the bottom. A tiny hole, no bigger than a grain of rice. I fill the jug with the diluted solution, and then I carry it to the base of a large tomato plant. I set it down gently so the hole is just above the soil, and I watch the first slow drop form, hang, and fall. It takes about an hour to empty. The water soaks deep, pulling the goodness down where the roots can follow. In my garden, this deep watering is a kind of meditation. I sit on my old green stool and watch the drips, counting them like my grandfather counted the beats of a temple bell. I remember one season, my eggplants were small and purple with cold, and the leaves had a dusty look. I had forgotten to treat them. I mixed a batch, this time with the full 3 boosters, and watered each plant with 1 cup. Within a week, the new leaves were the size of my outstretched hand, deep green and glossy. The flowers came, and then the fruits, glossy and heavy. I grow Japanese eggplant, a long, slender kind that soaks up less oil when you cook it, and they outperformed everything else that year. The same with my shishito peppers, a mild Japanese variety. They were loaded, so many that we roasted them over charcoal and still gave bags away to the mailman and the librarian. The shishito peppers, when you blister them in a hot, dry pan, pop and blister and fill the kitchen with a sweet, grassy smoke. My wife tosses them with a pinch of sea salt and a drop of toasted sesame oil. On that summer evening, we sat on the back steps, eating them with our fingers, watching the fireflies rise. That is the true harvest, not the weight of the fruit, but the moment of quiet joy. Now I want to speak very gently about the quiet sadness I feel when I walk through the garden aisles in this modern country. I see row after row of plastic bottles, each one promising a bigger tomato or a greener lawn. There is a product for every want. A spray for bugs, a granule for blooms, a liquid for roots. The industry has learned to package and sell back to us what the earth already provides in a more patient, more whole form. It is not that these products are evil. It is that they make it easy to forget. They make it easy to bypass the living web under our feet and treat the soil like a dead medium instead of a breathing partner. I remember once a kind young woman at the garden store tried to sell me a bottle of root enhancer with a long chemical name. She meant well, but I thought of my grandfather's shed, with its shelves of clay pots and dried herbs and a jar of saved ash, smelling of earth and aged wood, not plastic. I smiled and told her I had something at home. She looked confused. I do not blame her. The world she was born into is different, but I do wish that every garden center had a small library, with an old farmer sitting in the corner, ready to whisper the simple ways for free. Matanai means more than not wasting things. It means not wasting the knowledge of our elders, not wasting the simple power of a cup of yeast water that costs 10 cents to make. I say this without anger, only with a grandfather's hope that you will remember along with me. So let me gather the threads for you. The heart of this method is a quart of warm water, 1 tablespoon of dry active yeast, and 1 tablespoon of sugar, fermented overnight until foamy. Dilute that into a 5-gallon bucket of room temperature water. Water each vegetable plant with about 1 cup at the base every 2 weeks. If you wish to deepen the effect, you can add 1 tablespoon of wood ash, 1 tablespoon of fine eggshell powder, and half a teaspoon of Epsom salt to the starter before diluting. Apply on a mild morning or evening, not in the scorching midday sun, and then watch. Watch the way the stems thicken, the way the leaves reach up, the way the flowers set fruit that stays and swells instead of falling. Watch the soil begin to smell sweet and crumbly again. I cannot promise you a garden without challenges. The insects will still come. The weather will sometimes be cruel. But I can promise you will have given your plants a foundation so sturdy that they can withstand much more than before. And I can promise you will feel a small, quiet satisfaction that comes from using something that was almost thrown away. Now I ask you again, friends, tell me in the comments where you live and what you grow. I read every one, and I learn from you as much as I hope you learn from me. If you try this humble yeast brew, let me know how your plants answer. Did they stand a little taller? Did you get more cucumbers than you could eat? I would love to hear your stories. My grandfather used to say, when we stood at the edge of the field in the pink evening light, we do not own the soil, we borrow it from our grandchildren. That is the final lesson of Matanai. Feed the soil with respect, with the little gifts from your kitchen, and it will feed your family for years beyond counting. Thank you for letting this old man share a small piece of his village with you today. Now go and make your soil sing.